At the beginning of this story, someone tells us that there was only darkness. The continuum was under the veil of shadows. It was, in every sense, the perfect order. However, a beam of light emerged, the magnificent and radiant brilliance. It was the very embodiment of change and chaos. This light spread throughout the darkness, giving rise to time and movement, and thus, life was created. Life, born from light, grew stronger and stronger. Among them, the 6 brightest lights were called the illuminated, and became leaders of all life. Their clashes caused tremors across the world until the darkness could no longer bear the arrogance of the light. So, the darkness created a guardian of order to judge the illuminated. His name was Phantaminum. Born from the darkness, the guardian of order is the most powerful being. He tracked down the illuminated and subdued each of them. And those he subdued were turned into jewels and sealed away. After sealing the illuminated, the darkness commanded Phantaminum to return with the jewels. But Phantaminum disobeyed. He had been captivated by the light of the jewels. Drunk with the glow of the gems on his own body, he declared himself the King of Jewels. The King of Jewels and his precious stones ruled over all living beings in history, and the world came to fear him, calling him the Devourer of Light. After this tale, we see an eye-opening for the first time. A woman is shown holding a child, saying that in the end, he had been found, a new illuminated. She says he is the only one capable of confronting the Son of Darkness and King of Jewels, Phantaminum, and the illuminated who submitted to him. She says this baby is their only hope, Urek Mazino. And he immediately pees right in the woman's face. I collapsed at this part, and the woman just says it's holy water, lalo. Finally, the woman says that from now on, this child will make the world shine forever. Cut. Somewhere in the tower, years later, the same baby, now older, is wondering where the hell he is. He laughs and says he got lost. He wants to know where the exit is, and where the damn Phantaminum went. Suddenly, a portal appears in front of him, along with a monster, congratulating him for opening the door and entering, saying he has earned the right to become a regular and climb the tower. Becoming a regular and climbing the tower is the chance to obtain everything. Then he asks what Urek thinks about that. But in Urek's mind, he's just trying to figure out why the hell a talking rabbit the size of a human is speaking to him. The rabbit realizes Urek is someone who shouldn't have entered the tower, so it turns its back on him and says he must not get involved with the tower. Urek at least asks the rabbit to tell him where the exit is. The rabbit says it doesn't know the way out of the tower, and that Urek will have to find it on his own. Urek asks, when the rabbit said everything was possible inside the tower, if that meant Phantaminum could be in there too. The rabbit doesn't know who that is but also can't say he's not there. Classic I know that I know nothing moment. The rabbit says that, in the end, everything exists at the top of the tower. So Urek decides to enter the tower. The rabbit doesn't get it. Urek says he definitely chased Phantaminum into the tower, and since the rabbit doesn't know where the exit is, he might as well go in. Our protagonist is a madman. The rabbit says that if that's what the one who opened the door wishes, so be it, and says that this tower does not reject those who challenge it. Thus, the entrance gate opens, welcoming our protagonist, Urek Mazino. In the testing floor, a megaphone announces to the regulars that they've arrived at the lowest floor of the tower, the infernal test. And our boy Urek is just snoring away like nothing happened. What appears to be the rabbit, speaking through the megaphone, announces that there are a total of 400 participants, and from now on, they must fight each other. When only 200 remain, the test ends, and those 200 will proceed to the next trial. If the number of regulars doesn't drop to 200 within an hour, all of them will fail. He ends by saying they better not hide or rest. They must give it their all to survive. As soon as the test starts, A boy is running through the woods when a huge guy with long hair appears out of nowhere and attacks. Just as he's about to hit the kid, a voice yells, "Leave," and finishes the brute with a single slap, one-hit kill. A woman named Lo Pabia Evelyn appears, asking the kid if he's okay. The boy says yes and thanks her. He asks why she saved him if it's a competition. She says that the moment she heard the rules, she thought, since she doesn't know what kinds of tests are coming next, if the 200 strongest are chosen now, it'll be tough later. So if she has to compete again, she'd rather face the 199 weakest. Her plan is to use this test to hunt the strong ones. Smart as hell. The boy asks if she only saved him because he seemed weak, and she says, "Yep, unless you're actually strong." He immediately starts screaming that he's not strong at all, that he's super weak. She calls him a weakling and says they should get moving. Then a super ugly six-armed guy, though very strong, appears, fighting a bunch of people on his own. Evelyn says it's her chance to strike. She jumps on his neck and gives him a single blow to the shoulder, sniping the kill from everyone and moving on to her next target. She looks up and sees someone on top of a hill, another woman with pink hair. The boy with Evelyn asks if she's really that strong for Evelyn to tell them to hide. That woman on the hill is a princess of Zahard. The boy is shocked to see a princess of Zahard, whom he'd only heard about in rumors. Evelyn complains that a monster like her had to show up right during their round. The boy says the rumors were true. She was incredibly beautiful, and yeah, she's insanely gorgeous. Evelyn, jealous, pokes the boy in the eye. He screams, asking why, and she says she just got mad for several reasons and didn't want to lose to someone who's strong and beautiful. Fair. The boy, crying, says Evelyn is beautiful too, but she says she didn't poke him just to hear that from him. The princess draws her sword and hurls it toward the ground, and with that one move, she wipes out a bunch of people. It doesn't even make sense how her sword flies like that. The number of survivors drops instantly, and Evelyn asks the boy if he still thinks she's incredibly beautiful. He reluctantly says yes, but that after what he just saw, he wouldn't want to make eye contact with her. Once again, Evelyn tries to poke the boy's eye out, saying she might finally understand why men die young. Maybe helping him go blind would extend his lifespan. Meanwhile, in the princess's mind, from the top of the hill, she sees our protagonist sleeping like a baby and notices a group approaching him. They've formed a group, and she assumes the protag is done for. The group finds him sleeping, and what looks like their leader says the tower's full of weirdos. He didn't expect to find someone napping in the middle of this chaos. He starts stepping on the protag to wake him up, telling him to get up. The protag just says he wants to sleep a little more and turns over. So the guy decides to finish him off. But as the group lunges at him, the protag jumps up and dropkicks them all. He gets up and says he told them he wanted to sleep more. The leader, who didn't get kicked, is now terrified and tells him to go right back to sleep. Suddenly, it's announced that only one regular remains before the test ends, with just 10 minutes left. The princess jumps down to where the protag is. He asks if she came to have a date with him. She says, as if, and tells him he forgot to finish off the last guy, so she came to help, poor guy. The protag stops her and says he doesn't need that kind of help. She's confused and asks why he didn't finish the guy, since that's how the test works. The protag asks why he should follow the rules if he's a free man. The princess warns him that if he keeps acting so carefree during the test, she'll be the one to finish him, pointing her sword at his neck. Bold move. The protag coolly replies she's welcome to try. Absolute legend. But in his mind, all he can think about is how pretty she looks up close. He looks away, and the princess asks why. Was he scared? But he says he was just embarrassed to stare at such a pretty girl, since he's not used to this kind of thing, shy boy behavior. She tells him to take the test seriously. He just asks her to calm down and says he doesn't need to be like everyone else. She says time is short and everyone else is hiding, so it made sense to just take out whoever was in front of her. The protag replies that if that's the case, there's someone right above them, pointing at the flying megaphone. He starts yelling at the weird floating square, asking if it also counts in the survivor tally. Makes sense, honestly. The princess tells him he's insane. That's the test supervisor, a ranker. Obviously he's not part of the count, and even if the protag beat him, it wouldn't count. But against all logic and advice, the protag keeps calling out the supervisor for a one-on-one fight. He says if he beats him, it should count as 2 eliminations. Finally, the test supervisor shows himself and calls the protag a lunatic. He says he has no idea where this kid came from. Must be some backwater where they don't even know what a ranker is. Dude's twice the protag's size. The supervisor says there's always a few idiots, like the protag, clueless regulars, also like the protag. He asks if the protag even knows who he's talking to. And the protag answers, obviously a rookie. He's got guts. The supervisor bursts out laughing from being called a rookie, and the louder he laughs, the louder the noise gets. Even the princess has to cover her ears from the sheer volume. In a chilling scene, the supervisor grabs the protag's shoulder and asks if he's lost his mind. He explains there's a rule saying rankers can't touch regulars without reason, but test supervisors can impose appropriate penalties, big quotes on that, when rules are broken. He asks if the protag's in the mood to lose a leg. Seems like a fair punishment for the situation. The protag stares him down and asks if he really did anything wrong, then forcibly removes the supervisor's hand from his shoulder. The supervisor is shocked by the raw strength. The protag's just a regular and doesn't even know how to use Shinsu yet. The protag says that kind of punishment only makes sense coming from someone with real power. Just as things were about to heat up, an alarm sounds. The number of remaining regulars has dropped to 200, marking the end of the test. The princess thinks it's a good thing someone else got eliminated first, otherwise, the protag would have been toast. But now she's thinking, if he's crazy enough to challenge a supervisor, maybe he'll be useful to her later on. The supervisor says the protag got lucky, tells him to be grateful he survived, and warns him to proceed with humility. The tower's full of monsters beyond his wildest imagination, and arrogance won't get him far. He apologizes to the princess in case he was too harsh. She says it's fine. In the background, the protag says it's a shame. He could have taken the supervisor down in a second, sassy king. Suddenly, a portal opens, radiating some strange energy that impresses Yurek. Someone steps out and tells the supervisor, whose name is Dan John finally, that that's enough. This man is the test director. The protag asks Dan John if this director guy is strong. He's insane. The director himself replies that no, he's not just strong. He's something far beyond that, pure aura. He says the test is over, tells Dan John to stop wasting time, and announce the result. Dan John warns that the next test will be way harder and tells everyone to be ready, especially the protag, because this time he got lucky, but next time he'll split him in 2, regular or not. The protag just tells him to try. With that, the regulars are teleported to the next test area. The scene shifts to the floating fortress of the test floor, more specifically to the director's office, where the director says it's a disgrace for a supervisor to interfere in the first test. Dan John says he's sorry for falling for a regular's provocation. It was the first time that it happened, and he says he couldn't hold himself back. The director asks if he's belittling himself because the floor ruler is currently absent. Dan John says that's not what he meant, and that something like that won't happen again. He says he's always heard rumors about how terrifying the director is. The director thanks Dan John and tells him not to let it happen again. He adds that it's unlikely, but if Danjon falls for a regular's provocation again, he should make sure to eliminate the regular immediately. But to be clear, the director won't be responsible for the consequences. In Danjon's mind, he doesn't really understand what the director wants from him. He's only holding back because the guy is terrifying. But even with the director's permission, if he gets the chance, he's going to destroy our dear protagonist, or at least try. The director looks at our protagonist's file and says they've got a very interesting regular this time. He doesn't even know where the kid came from, since there's no record of his origin. In the waiting room for the second test, the guy who fainted just from fear says 200 people is still too many, and jokes that maybe he should thin that number down a bit, only to get pushed by our protagonist. Remembering what happened, he moves aside and calls our protagonist boss. The protagonist complains, saying there are too many people in that place. Looking at that crazy guy, the more he looks at him, the older the guy seems compared to the protagonist. Another supervisor appears flying and welcomes the regulars, congratulating them for surviving the first test. She introduces herself as Gisle. The protagonist thinks it's annoying that it's a different supervisor. Gisle says the next test will be very simple. To climb the tower, there are two essential skills they must learn: cooperation and division. Previously, they were just beating each other up, but now they'll have to work together. The supervisor tells them to split into teams of 3. She gives a tip: only get close enough to those you could defend yourself from in case of betrayal. The game they'll play is the traditional spin or drop. With a wave of her hand, she summons a really ugly goat behind her. Somewhere else in the tower, another guy, who looks very powerful, is shown manipulating an energy orb and throwing it at someone, who dies instantly. The director appears, apparently, and says that the way this guy kills is lazy. The guy asks when the director got there, revealing the director's name as Rahab, so now we'll call him Rahab. He asks Rahab how the test went, and if the regulars are promising, but Rahab says they're all ordinary, showing a bunch of rankers atop cliffs, watching Rahab. Back to the spin or drop test, many people don't understand what kind of game it is. The guy who kinda became the protagonist's lackey asks what kind of holes they lived in not to know. Spin or drop? Chill, smart guy. The protagonist asks how the game works, and he explains that you either spin or drop your hand, obviously, forming teams accordingly. Those who spin go with others who spun, and those who dropped go with others who dropped. He asks the protagonist to tell him in advance if he'll spin or drop so they can be on the same team, but the protagonist asks why he would team up with him, cold. But the supervisor says that, unfortunately, the test they're doing is a bit different from what he explained. Normally, what he said would be a simple team selection game. But in this test, there's a bonus. They'll face the goat behind her in a game of spin or drop. The supervisor tells them to pay attention to the goat's hands. The goat's right hand means spin, and the left means drop. The supervisor's right hand means drop, and the left means spin. If she does it, she passes the round. From now on, all 200 present must observe the goat's hands and mimic them. If they manage to replicate it simultaneously at the end of the countdown, they pass the test. But if they get it wrong, the imitation fails. As the saying goes, seeing is believing. Then she asks if she can start the first round. She tells everyone to focus and get ready, and orders the goat to begin. Music starts playing, and the goat extends its hands. And because nothing in life is easy, the goat moves its hands super fast. None of them can see what move it made. The supervisor calls the regulars pathetic, because only 24 people managed to beat the goat. The protagonist's lackey doesn't pass, but since the protagonist is the protagonist, he clears it easily, and even asks how the guy managed to fail such a simple test. The supervisor says that those who won earn the right to choose their partner. The right to choose was only given to those who dropped their hand. The supervisor asks if any of the 24 who passed would like to choose a partner. Evelyn says she'd like to choose someone, and the supervisor tells her to pick someone who failed. The boy, thinking Evelyn would pick him because of the last test, finally learns no one cares about him. She turns her back and chooses a guy she saw doing well in the previous test. Then the supervisor announces that they'll continue playing the game under the same rules. If the hand positions remain the same, they'll stay on the same team. With the second round starting, only Evelyn pulls a low-key move and spins her hand super quickly, making it impossible for the random guy to see what her final position was, causing him to pick the wrong one. Evelyn says she's disappointed, thinking he might be useful. Smiling at him, she says she doesn't want to be on a team with someone who can't keep up with her level. The supervisor says this is expected from someone from one of the 10 great families. They understand how the tower's rules work and play along. The supervisor announces that, unfortunately, the two failed to become companions. Therefore, the one who failed is now offered as a sacrifice to the goat. F in the chat. The supervisor says that, as everyone could see, if the chosen person doesn't win, they become an offering to the goat. However, if they succeed, they also get to decide whether they want to become the partner of the person who picked them or offer them to the goat as well. This game is just plain evil. Then, the supervisor tells them to keep playing until they form a team of 3 for this test. Anyone who fails to form a team will be eliminated. Evelyn understands that, although it's supposed to be about building a team, the game was like all the others. It's about the survival of the fittest. That means if you manage to copy the goat's move in the first round, you get the chance to eliminate anyone from the test, as long as you're quick with your hands. Now that the mini demo is over, the supervisor tells everyone who succeeded in the first round to choose an opponent to play against. Now it gets fun. The damn protagonist LOL chooses his lackey to play, totally backstabbing him. The guy doesn't want to play with the prota anymore, and the prota says he was the one who wanted to team up with him before. The guy tries to explain, but the prota tells him to stop being soft. Just as the guy is about to refuse, the supervisor announces that anyone who refuses to play will be offered to the goat immediately. Prepared to lose to the prota, the guy says that a real man has to face challenges head-on. Pay attention. The dude, who might look weak but isn't dumb, understands what the prota meant, but wonders if he can trust him or not. Giving him the benefit of the doubt, when he looks at their hands, they're the same. He's shocked the prota did that for someone he just met, and says that now the prota's life is in his hands. The prota says he knows what the guy did. The guy asks why he did it, since the prota isn't even that strong to be risking himself like that, and the prota just says he thought the guy would trust him. Thanks to the guy trusting the prota starts trusting him too, since in the end, teamwork is built on trust. With the goat's hand about to grab the prota, he says that if it's not with this guy, maybe there's no one else he can team up with. In this badass scene, the guy tells the goat to stop because they're forming a team. The guy apologizes for being rude and nearly sending the prota to the afterlife. He says that before the tower, he was a nobody, but got lucky enough to get in, and that he'll never forget this act of trust. To kill the mood a bit, the prota says the guy looks way older than him, so he should talk casually to him. The guy literally short-circuits, but says he understands and even calls the prota bro. He says, all excited, that he and the prota should find someone strong to complete their team so they can be the strongest group. And the prota replies that the moment the guy joined, they already lost that chance, LOL. The supervisor announces that unfortunately, or fortunately, only 7 people managed to form teams. So, in the next round, only 1 representative from each team will play. The cross-eyed goat starts spinning its hand again. At the last second, The goat changes the hand position, the proto loses the round. And the guy, whose name we still don't know, and it's driving me nuts, asks how that happened. The proto says first, stop freaking out. He lost on purpose, and second, call him Urek. The guy doesn't understand why he lost on purpose, and the proto tells him to look around. He's sure a bunch of people also lost on purpose just like him. Since in the last round, people figured out who the skilled players were, who'd be dumb enough to challenge them to play. Even if they succeeded, they'd be forced to play, which is a hassle, and everyone's trying to avoid conflict. Same goes for our proto. The guy understands what the proto meant, and says that at least now no one will want to face the strongest. The proto agrees. It's likely, but there's always some lunatic out there. Cue the damn princess showing up and challenging the proto to a match. The proto looks confused and thinks the Zahard princess wants to eliminate him. I'm betting $5 she does. He tells the princess that if she wants to eliminate him, she might as well give up now, but she says she wants to join his team. Of course, he'd have to win first. Everyone's shocked she said she wants to team up with the proto. The guy tells him to accept the offer, but the proto says he can't form a team with her because he already has someone in mind. The princess feels offended because that means someone is better than her. But the proto leaves it vague and says maybe it's just a matter of preference. Even so, the princess says it doesn't matter because she'll join him anyway. She stretches out her hand and asks the proto to start the game. But at this rate, he says she's gonna end up being a sacrifice. In his head, he thinks this is some kind of romance between them, and that she's totally into him. What great self-esteem. They start the round and both spin their hands like the Flash. And to everyone's surprise, their hands match. The proto says he's not making a team with this woman, and the goat charges at the princess. Everyone's shocked. To the surprise of many, the goat cruelly grabs the princess and just straight up swallows her without a second thought. Even the supervisor is shocked that the princess failed the second test. She really got eaten. Everyone starts wondering how a Zahard princess, who should have passed the test easily. Then everyone starts judging the proto for what he did. The proto's friend, we're calling him that now, asks who he's going to pick for the team now that the princess is out. I don't think she is. And he points to the boy who was with Evelyn. The friend says he looks way too weak, but the proto says he has a feeling about him. He smells like the same scent he smelled when he first arrived at the tower, the smell of salt. The protag's friend is upset because he threw away the chance to team up with a Zahard princess just because he had a hunch the kid might be useful. Not strong, just useful. The protag asks the question on everyone's mind. What the hell is Zahard, since everyone keeps talking about it? The protag's friend whispers the meaning of Zahard in his ear, and in a hilariously JoJo-like pose, our protag starts saying, "What? The king of this tower? A long time ago, someone came from the outside and now rules this tower." The protag lets out a surprised yell and asks the goat if he can change his mind, because he thinks he needs to meet the boy who's called a king. But the goat just shakes its head, no. The protag's disappointed, because now he really wants to meet that king and ask how to get out of here with Fantaminum and the others. Since there's no turning back, he sticks with his choice to pick the kid. In the third round, the game against the goat got even harder, and only 6 people won. The protag goes to call the kid, but we get Evelyn's internal monologue. She says she still hasn't managed to form a team, and the longer time went on, the harder the game became. Before, it was just about strength, but now, what's needed to form a team isn't skill, it's trust. Even if you turn an enemy into a teammate, without absolute trust, they couldn't form a team in this test. This place is one where everyone's a rival. She thinks about the kid from before, but being stubborn, says he was too weak to team up with her, and that's why she's a lone dummy. The protag approaches the boy and calls him. Evelyn sees it, and can't believe they're going to form a team with a literal child. She starts putting herself down, saying she's not special, so there's no reason anyone would want to eliminate her, and no one would want her on their team. Girl, stop crying. At this rate, she says she's going to be left behind and fail the test. That means going back to where she came from, the gutter of the successors, the forgotten village, where those abandoned by the gods ended up. The protag calls the boy. The kid immediately says he's weak and powerless, so there's no reason for the protag to want to eliminate him. Just as the protag is about to say he wants to team up, Evelyn butts in and calls the kid to play. The protag's friend tells her not to cut in line, but she fires back saying they may have started talking first, but she started the actual game first. So she calls out to Mr. Liu, aka the little boy. They start arguing, and the supervisor steps in, saying that since both of them asked Mr. Liu to play, the decision falls to him. She asks him to choose between the protag and Evelyn. And foolishly, the boy apologizes to the protag and chooses Evelyn. On top of that, he says he'll keep his hands completely still for Evelyn, putting his trust in her. The protag even asks if they already knew each other. Evelyn, being a bit of a diva, says that even though she didn't pick him the first time, he chooses her without hesitation. She starts yelling, saying maybe he feels guilty, and is trying to throw the game on purpose to get rid of her. She threatens him, saying that if he ruins the game with his plan, she won't forgive him. Mr. Liu says he doesn't want to do any of that. He just wants to team up with her and says that he likes her. Dude just confessed live, lol. Both the protag and Evelyn freeze, with the protag turning his back and telling his buddy they should leave. There's no room for them with this weird couple. Evelyn says she's from one of the 10 great families, and there's a long way to go before she starts thinking about marriage, but admits he's braver than he looks. He says he doesn't like her that way, yeah right? Evelyn says she won't move either. She trusts Mr. Liu and kind of likes him now too. The protag says they just wasted a ton of time. Then, a shady-looking guy says that since it seems like the protag didn't find a team, he offers to join him. He introduces himself as Neo. He's not amazing or anything, but the protag is strong. The protag agrees, saying Neo does seem strong, and there aren't many good options left, but he doesn't trust Neo. Neo laughs, saying the protag is pretty sharp. He admits he's not someone you should trust, self-sabotaging, huh? But at least he won't get in the protag's way, since the protag and his buddy aren't his targets. The protag tells us that the closer Neo gets to him, the dizzier he feels. He has the same smell as Mr. Liu, the smell of salt. Yep, Mr. Liu and Evelyn really are a team now. The protag decides to call Neo to play, but of course, only if Neo can keep up, because Neo's piqued his curiosity. The supervisor announces the end of team selection. The number of teams formed through the game is 10. Yep, Neo joined the protag's team. She says those who failed to form a team are obviously eliminated, and those who did will advance. The protag is confused, because there were only 9 teams. Suddenly, the goat starts coughing loudly. Then the supervisor tells us that the death match inside the goat has ended. Knew those guys weren't dead. The 3 survivors inside will now form another team and move on to the next test. Yep, the princess is very much alive. The supervisor is impressed by the princess's feat, even though she knew the girl was strong. She didn't expect a Zahard princess to use ice. The supervisor says she's glad she had this game prepared in advance. She calls the protag a bastard because he caught the princess off guard. The princess says the supervisor changed the rules at the last second. The supervisor defends herself, saying she didn't. She only said the goat would eat her. Liar, not that she'd be eliminated. She says they'll see each other in the next test. Among those who advance through the game, the ones who were eaten by the goat must eliminate at least one team. So technically, those 3 still aren't really playing. That's why they're called the remnants. The princess agrees with the well-crafted rule and says that in the next test, she'll make sure to return all the humiliation she went through and ensure that our dear protagonist is eliminated. She took it personally. In the supervisor's room, it's announced that a total of 30 regulars advance to the next test, and the supervisor should prepare to receive them and host the next challenge, which will be the crown game. At the floating ship dock, literally, the regulars are impressed with the place. The protagonist asks his buddy if the test will be held here. The supervisors arrive and ask everyone to pay attention. The director is among them. The director introduces himself and greets the regulars, stating his name, Rahab, but I'd rather call him Director. It sounds more imposing. He says that all those who passed the tests and were deemed worthy of being there today should be proud of themselves and continue to overcome the upcoming challenges. He explains that the regulars will board the floating cruise ship and travel through various areas on the testing floor to complete the exam. If they pass the final test, located at the last destination of the cruise, they will become true regulars. By doing so, they'll earn the glorious opportunity to climb the tower, gaining wealth, fame, power, and strength. The grand journey to get closer to the truth, following the same path of glory paved by King Zahard and the 10 great families. The regulars start picking up tickets being handed out and are informed that these same tickets will be checked daily at noon, so they should never lose them. The protagonist looks back and notices a shady hooded guy who seems to have infiltrated the test. Already on the cruise, the protagonist's friend is amazed since it's his first time seeing something like this. Danjon welcomes everyone aboard the regulars' cruise and announces that he will now be the supervising instructor. He says that while the next test is being prepared, the regulars will go through position training on the ship. During this period, they will train according to the position assigned to them, and there will be intermediate assessments for each one. These assessments will be conducted by the supervisors, and those who rank highest will receive benefits, while those considered unranked will be disqualified, regardless of past performance. Brutal. The protagonist doesn't quite understand the training, and his buddy panics, thinking he'll be eliminated. Neil explains that a position refers to the role someone plays on a team. The term comes from the roles each of the original tower climbers had. He lists the 5 main ones. Scout monitors enemy movements from the front lines and manipulates the battlefield. Light bearer stays in the back, supervises everything, and commands the team with a lighthouse. Spear bearer works with the light bearer, eliminating long-range enemies. Wave controller manipulates Shinsu, the source of all power, to overwhelm enemies with devastating force. And finally, the fisherman, the one who hunts and captures enemies anywhere, acting alone. Neo says there are many other positions, but those 5 are the main ones. He deduces that the protagonist must come from a very distant place if he didn't know that. The protagonist vaguely confirms that's about right. Danjon then presents the supervisors, who will mentor each position. For wave controllers, Baskerville. For light bearers, Pudry. For scouts, Gisley. For spear bearers, Heidi. And for fishermen, Danjon himself. Next, he announces the regulars' assigned positions based on the aptitudes they showed in the previous tests. From now on, they're to follow their respective mentors for today's schedule. Unsurprisingly, our protagonist is assigned fisherman, and his buddy becomes a spear bearer. Neil is a wave controller. In the end, each of them got a different role, which the protagonist sees as a good thing. They won't be competing against each other. He says goodbye, telling everyone to survive and do their best. In the fisherman's training room, Danjon again welcomes the now official fisherman regulars. To be a supervisor, you gotta have manners. Getting straight to the point, he says the first thing they need to know is that fishermen are the pinnacle of all positions. That means they are the strongest among the regulars gathered there. So the weak ones can get wrecked. While other positions are only getting simple introductions today, theirs will be different. Dan John says he won't tolerate a weakling carrying the fisherman title. Therefore, there will be an entry test, and those who fail will have to pack their things and leave the cruise ship. The protagonist says the test sounds fun. The people around him say it doesn't make sense, and that they were unlucky to be stuck with a crazy guy like Dan John. Dan John starts the test by saying, "Come at me," but no one moves. He gets pissed and calls someone out to face him. Just as the protagonist is about to go, a guy steps up, saying he likes being first at everything. Dan John tells him that before approaching, he must grab a blue rope hanging nearby. When he touches it, the rope moves on its own and wraps around him like a sash. Looks like they're about to sumo wrestle. Now close to Dan John, he tells the guy to grab the sash from each other and hold tight. Then he tells everyone to pay attention because this is the ready stance. While holding the belt, they are to push upward using their body strength, and with that, he announces the start of the game. The protagonist feels relieved that he wasn't the first one to go through that embarrassment. Dan John tells the regular who started the challenge to lower his stance and strengthen his legs, because if he just stands there acting arrogant, he's going to get a wake-up call. And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. Dan John gives him a wake-up call, knocks him flat on his back onto the Shinsu floor, and he loses. Everyone is shocked at how easily Dan John slammed the guy to the ground, and he calls for the next one. The protagonist says he's going to challenge Dan John this time, but once again, someone else steps in before him, and he's left behind again. Annoying, they won't let him fight. Another guy stands next to him, and the protagonist asks why he didn't go for classification. This goth emo guy says he's not cut out for that, and is allergic to being classified. The protagonist immediately thinks this guy is super weird, and he is. In the ship's engine room, it's revealed that the hooded person the protagonist saw earlier was Princess Zahard, along with two others who haven't been introduced yet. She says that the first part of their plan went well. They got onto the cruise. Now, the second part is to steal a ticket that was given to the teams. If they manage to steal it by midnight, the ticket will become theirs, and they'll be able to stay in the test. So, she tells them to split up and each find their target. She finds out that the protagonist was assigned as a fisherman and decides that before the night is over, she'll steal his ticket, or try to. Cut back to Dan John, who's just beaten the two next challengers. One of them twists his ankle and can't get up to leave. Dan John tells him not to show weakness because there's no place for weaklings there. The protagonist decides to help the fallen person, and right after that, grabs the blue sash and steps up for his one-on-one. It's go time. The protagonist thinks the game looks fun, but he's more curious about the kind of power Dan John used earlier, aka Shisu. In a badass scene, the protagonist says, "Since you showed me the power of this place first, I should show you the power from outside the tower, right?" He said it. Dan John tries to figure out what's up with the protagonist. Even though he doesn't know how to use Shinsu, he mimics the protagonist's movements in a funny attempt to figure him out. The protagonist yells at Dan John to come at him. He approaches Dan John, who's confused by what he's doing. The protagonist says Dan John is scared, and obviously, Dan John gets pissed, calling him a son of a. YouTube would censor that part. He asks whether the protagonist is bluffing to boost his confidence or trembling with fear. He tells him to hurry up and grab the belt. Dan John notices that, even though the protagonist is just a freshly recruited regular, he's already way stronger than average. Our protagonist comments that for Dan John's size, he's actually pretty impressive, and asks him not to make this boring. As soon as the match begins, the protagonist places his foot behind Dan John's heel, unbalancing him and slamming him to the ground instantly. The protagonist, Danjon, and everyone else are left speechless by what just happened. Everyone starts shouting, saying a regular just beat a supervisor. Danjon starts crying, saying it didn't count, that he slipped on his own, that he was adjusting his strength because he thought the protagonist might die if he went all out. That's why he lost his balance, and blah blah blah. The crowd starts accusing him of trying to cheat, and saying he should be ashamed. Danjon gets angry, and shouts for everyone to shut up. He knows that even though the protagonist seems a bit clueless, he's holding back for some reason, and that wasn't the real power he wanted to see. The protagonist, probably lying, says that he also noticed Danjon slipped on his own. So, he asks to ignore everything and restart the match. Danjon says that really is the right thing to do. He's probably just scared of losing again. The protagonist says he doesn't want to be accepted just because he won by luck. Danjon isn't sure if he's crazy or just that confident. He says telling the truth is a good attitude and tells the protagonist to get ready again. He's about to get worked. Already holding on to each other, Danjon tells us that even while holding back his Shinsu, there's no way he can lose in terms of physical strength, or is there? Since he let his guard down once, now he plans to dominate the protagonist. As soon as he calls for the match to start, the protagonist just lifts Danjon like a baby. He looks the supervisor in the face, and says it's boring if Danjon doesn't use his real strength. He wants him to show the power he used back in the testing area. To keep the tension going, the scene cuts to where the protagonist's buddy is, the spear bearer's training room. As mentioned earlier, the supervisor responsible is Heidi, who introduces herself, and she's very beautiful, by the way. She says that today, they'll do a simple spear-throwing drill, just a basic test to assess talent. So no one should feel pressured. The protagonist's buddy, along with Mr. Liu, seem amazed at the way she moves her arm. With a single throw, she launches the spear into the sky. It flew so fast it cut through the wind like it broke the sound barrier. She turns around with a sweet smile and asks who wants to try first, getting everyone hyped, unlike Danjon. Surprisingly, the protagonist's buddy is good at throwing spears, and, unsurprisingly, Mr. Liu is completely useless, unable to throw even one properly. He wonders how he was even chosen to be a regular if he has no talent. The protagonist's buddy walks over to Mr. Liu and asks why he's sitting on the floor looking down. Mr. Liu says it's because he can't throw his spear very far. But the buddy tells him not to worry. This was just his first time doing it. Finally, the protagonist's buddy introduces himself by name. Rohan, very simple name, but I'll stop calling him the protagonist's buddy now. Rohan says he saw Mr. Liu during the last test and thought he was cool, and asks what his name is. He introduces himself as Liu. I'll call him Liu from now on, not Mr. Liu. The two shake hands and greet each other, forming something like a friendship. Rohan tells Liu to cheer up, since the protagonist tried to choose him as a teammate. So he's sure Liu has some kind of incredible hidden talent. But Liu really thinks he has no talent or hidden skill at all. Rohan tells Liu to trust the protagonist's instincts, that Liu will surely become someone amazing. Even Rohan believes that. He says that even if they're not officially teammates, from the moment the protagonist tried to choose Liu, he decided to treat Liu in his heart like one. So they both should give their best to survive together. Rohan best character in the story. Rohan takes Liu and says he'll show him how to use his strength, and Liu thanks him. If either of these two die, I'm dropping this story immediately. Liu watches as Rohan tries to teach him how to use a spear, and all he can see is that Rohan is a good person, just like Evelyn. He says it seems like there are so many good people in the tower, 3 people out of 400. He thanks the two of them for showing kindness even to someone like him. A cursed existence, he's definitely asking for it. Back to our amazing protagonist, in a panel that, let's be honest, is a little sus. Lifting Dan-jan like a baby, Dan-jan doesn't understand how a regular can have so much strength and wants to know what kind of power the protagonist has. Meanwhile, the protagonist feels relieved, since he can feel his strength gradually returning to normal. The protagonist once again asks Dan-jan to use that same power from before, or else he'll suffer huge humiliation in front of the other regulars. Dan-jan decides to show the protagonist what Shinsu really is. The protagonist feels that same power again and realizes his body is hardening, sus, and getting heavier, more sus. It's definitely a power unknown to our protagonist, and it's making Dan-jan even stronger. Now he's even more curious to know what this power is. Dan-jan says that this curiosity about the power will be what gets the protagonist eliminated. Unfortunately, Dan-jan can't use his full power recklessly, because in the tower, there's a rule that rankers like him can't hurt regulars like the protagonist without permission, administrator approval, or an agreement. At worst, Dan-jan could be banned or executed. If he used all his power, the protagonist's body wouldn't be able to handle it. Without Shisu resistance, he'd die fast. The protagonist says Dan-jan is jumping to conclusions for someone who can barely keep up with him. Even if Dan-jan tried, he says he wouldn't be able to eliminate the protagonist. Dan-jan says he won't fall for the protagonist's provocation and thinks it's better to be humiliated than to ruin his life. So he makes a deal with the protagonist. He says that in 3 days, there'll be a formal duel approved by the administrator, and he proposes they bet his life on this duel. Dan-jan says he can't reveal the details of the next test, but he does say it's called the Crown Game. And according to the info he got, there's a space where the two of them can fight away from everyone's eyes. If they fight in secret, with mutual consent, he can face off against the protagonist. The protagonist asks about risking their lives in this duel. Dan-jan says that if he doesn't want to see it, then one life is better than these boring games. The protagonist says Dan-jan's offer is tempting, but he has one condition. Dan-jan has to get down, throw himself to the ground, and admit defeat. The protagonist asks why he should do that, and Dan-jan promises to make sure all the regulars present will pass. Dan-jan asks if the protagonist agrees, and he accepts. Like a soap opera actor, he starts talking about how the supervisor was so strong and yada yada yada. And Dan-jan starts acting too. They both act terribly. Dan-jan says that from the start, he didn't intend to fail them with this forced test, liar. What he really wanted to see was their determination in a critical situation. So he says no one will fail the entry test and welcomes the regulars to the fisherman position. He whispers to the protagonist that in 3 days, in the Crown Game testing area, he's going to make him play for Flamingo. In a very weird inner monologue, the protagonist thinks that even though Dan-jan isn't really his type, he kinda likes him. What is this conversation? Dan-jan tells the regulars to return to their respective rooms. But the protagonist is excited because it's been so long since someone challenged him by risking their life. He says, "It's been a while since I fought someone who's risking their life with no remorse." As everyone's walking to their rooms, a girl touches the protagonist, and he remembers she was the one who twisted her ankle playing against the supervisor. She, very embarrassed, thanks him for helping her and runs away quickly. He reaches out to try to stop her and, not understanding anything, thinks that maybe his first love is finally starting. LOL, this protagonist is not okay. He says coming to the tower was worth it. She walks away laughing because she knows he blushed just from her saying thank you, and she knows exactly that he's a lonely guy. Now that she knows he might seem simple and dumb, but he's strong and seems easy to manipulate, she wants to use him to carry her through the exam. And, in the hallway, hidden, is our dear princess, waiting for the perfect moment to steal the protagonist's ticket, or at least try. Walking through the hallway, the princess hears someone yelling for her. She almost punches the person who called her, and then he says he's one of the survivors from the goat's belly. She tells him to be more careful, or others might hear them. He apologizes and says he has a proposal. He wants to join her to steal the protagonist's ticket. The princess doesn't see a reason to team up with the guy, but he actually just wants to get close to her. She says she's sorry, but she's very picky about her teammates. Take that, loser. The scene cuts to Rohan and Lu buying some sodas to drink. Rohan is super happy because, as long as they have a ticket, they can get food and drinks for free. I want a ticket like that. Our protagonist suddenly shows up, saying it looked like they had gotten pretty close. Rohan invites the protagonist to join them, and of course, he happily accepts. Someone is watching the three of them from a distance. Lu seems to have never drunk soda before, and Rohan explains that it's to refresh your body and tells him to give it a try. He instantly likes it, and then Evelyn barges in, kicking the door and scolding Lu for stuffing himself with soda on the first day of the test. Is she his mom now? She yells, saying he shouldn't teach weird things to her teammate, that there's no way a sugary drink like soda could be good for his body. Like an angry mom, she pokes him in the eye, scolding him for saying he was just visiting the room next door. She thought it was weird that he took so long to come back, so she went to look for him. She says she's very disappointed in Lu. She says that making friends with the protagonist and Rohan isn't cool because everyone there is an enemy. She makes it very clear in her words. Those bastards are all our enemies. Let the guy have some fun. Both the protagonist and Rohan feel bad for little Lu. He then asks Evelyn how the scout training went, and she immediately looks like she's about to cry and grabs a soda too. What a hypocrite. Meanwhile, outside the room, the guy who talked to the princess earlier is watching and says they're playing around without knowing anything. He says they don't even realize something could happen to them at any moment, since the princess is going after our lovely curly-haired protagonist. He's just going to steal one of the other tickets, and then the princess will be forced to team up with him. He clearly just wants to be with the princess. Lu asks Evelyn what happened during the scout training, and she says someone forced her to do the thing she hates most in the world. Lu keeps pestering her, wanting to know what it was, and she yells that she was forced to pet a puppy, and Lu is confused about why she's mad about that. When the instructor found out about Evelyn's family, she thought Evelyn might have the potential to become an anima. Anima is a special position that refers to someone who can subdue and control Shinhyu, basically divine sea fish and other creatures. This position is quite rare, even among rankers. But our Evelyn hates touching animals, and she said she wouldn't do it. However, the mentor got mad and asked how someone from the low Pabia family couldn't do it. She said it's not that she hates cute animals, she just doesn't like touching them, because if she does, they might not survive and go straight to F. Our protagonist asks Neo how his training went, and Neo is surprised that the protagonist knew he was there. The protagonist says he's not dumb enough to not notice someone hiding behind the door, or is he? Neo says they just did a simple test, like creating a Shinsu orb. The protagonist asks if that's the same power all the supervisors used. Neo says yes, but not as refined as the supervisors, obviously. The protagonist asks Neo to teach him too. Evelyn is dumbfounded seeing a regular with no lineage learn to use Shinsu after just one day of position training. Only she can be talented, huh? She immediately gets interested in watching Neo closely. Cut to the princess, saying the ticket inspection is scheduled for midnight, leaving her about 4 hours to get a ticket. She's got a backup plan, so she doesn't feel the need to panic. Her perfect moment to act is 30 minutes before the inspection starts. Jumping to about 4 hours later, Evelyn is drunk from drinking so much soda. I don't think that was soda, and they're leaving with Lu carrying her. Excited to learn Shinsu, the protagonist begs Neo to start teaching him, since everyone had left. After asking the protagonist to close the door, because it was open, he begins to explain that Shinsu is the divine water that fills the entire tower. Imagine a spiral of water. This water allows them to rest, eat, and sleep. It looked like Neo had something else to say but chose not to. Still, he continues saying that, by gathering Shinsu in a single domain, it can be used for various purposes. This domain is called a room. The protagonist asks how Neo does that, and he replies that there are two ways: either extract the Shinsu flowing through your own body, or compress the Shinsu in the space around you. Neo can only extract a small amount from his own body, and says that controlling Shinsu in the environment is a skill only those with extremely rare talent can acquire, and only after a long time training. Our protagonist is totally going to nail it on the first try. I bet $5. The protagonist asks how to extract Shinsu from the body, and Neo says you just have to imagine. He tells the protagonist to picture a sphere in front of him, then imagine a hole in that sphere with a small tube connecting it to his body. Then, through that hole, let the water flow from his body into the sphere. Makes sense, honestly. The protagonist begins to imagine exactly what Neo said, and someone just won $5 from me, and no, nothing appears. Neo reassures him, saying no one gets it on the first try. The protagonist asks if Neo did, and he says yes, because he's a genius. The protagonist calls him a show-off, but finds it strange because he definitely felt something. Neo says most regulars can't do it even in a lifetime. The protagonist starts imagining a sphere filling in his hand, and the scene cuts to a top-down view of the cruiser, a golden sea of Shinsu. The supervisors wake up, realizing a massive amount of Shinsu just appeared at the bottom of the cruiser. Danjon, who was napping in his frilly pink pajamas, runs out of the cruiser and sees the golden sea of Shinsu, wondering what the hell that is. Maybe the protagonist isn't just some loser after all. Meanwhile, in the protagonist's room, he's pissed off for not being able to do it, and Neo laughs at him, saying it's not that easy. Without realizing it, the protagonist keeps creating a sea of Shinsu, making the whole cruise ship tremble. Someone announces that, due to a sudden change in the weather, the ship's course will be drastically altered. Thanks, protag. The voice tells all the regulars to prepare for impact. The two in the room decide to go outside to see what's going on. The protagonist says he'll go to the bathroom first before checking it out. Danjon, outside the cruise ship, asks who the genius was that made this happen. No one can answer who it was, I know. He asks where the test director is, but nobody knows where he went either. These guys don't know anything. Danjon already suspects the director went to the castle. With the sea of Shinsu heading toward the ship, Danjon says he's never seen such a bright Shinsu in all his years as a ranker. Looking at the sea, he starts hearing a voice saying, "Hey, dirty hair!" Danjon thinks he's going crazy, and suddenly it gets bigger toward his face, and bam! He gets hit. Hope he didn't get KO'd. Lu is shown running back to his room, trying to find out what happened, while that dude obsessed with the princess is waiting to steal Lu's ticket. Sneakily, he lunges at the distracted Lu and Rohan, but Rohan activates Ultra Instinct and catches on to the scumbag's move. Rohan manages to protect Lu, who is almost hit in a vital spot. The hooded guy wants a ticket no matter what, and it looks like it'll be Lu's, since for him, it's natural to target the weakest. Meanwhile, in the men's bathroom, our protagonist is ranting to himself about how everything is going crazy out of nowhere. He doesn't even know it's all his fault. When suddenly the princess kicks the door open. People really love kicking doors in this series. Even the protagonist says the girls in this manhwa like busting down doors. He's shocked that she's in the men's bathroom and accuses her of following him. Since he's a simp, he immediately thinks she came just to ask him out. She tells him to move because she's only there to steal his ticket. She explains that the test director told her if she managed to steal someone's ticket, she could retake the test. He understands she needs a ticket, but asks if it really has to be his. We all know why he's asking that. She says it doesn't necessarily have to be his, so he assumes she's a stalker. The protagonist says she must already know how strong he is. Since he wants her to pass the test, he suggests she steal it from someone else. But going against all logic, she decides to take his ticket by force, because in her view, whether it's an enemy or a companion, the strongest one should always be the target. The protagonist thinks this is a big problem, but for a gentleman like him, fighting a woman is a hard thing to do, sure. Still, since it's come to this, he tells her to get ready to accept that he'll be the winner. Neo is shown walking through the cruise ship's hallways when he runs into the fight between Lu and Rohan versus that earlier weirdo. Evelyn is shown tossing and turning in her sleep, asking Lu for water, then realizes he's no longer in the room. Both Lu and Rohan want to know how the guy could be on the cruise if they both saw him get eaten by the giant goat. The guy throws a bunch of sharp needles at them. Rohan jumps in front of Lu, and the guy thinks maybe he can get both their tickets at once. When Neo tries to go help them, Evelyn shows up asking when the guy came back from the dead, because she could have sworn he got eaten by the goat. This dude's in trouble. Neo turns around and leaves. The guy is terrified, asking how Evelyn is even awake when she passed out from drinking so much. But she says it's impossible to drink something that bad for the body. Kids don't drink. First off, she says she doesn't drink alcohol. Second, she says nobody gets drunk off soda. It was all an act. She only got drunk from the smell. Lu was the one who carried her. She's totally into him. Anyway, she doesn't know how she crawled out of the goat's stomach, but she's not gonna forgive that guy for trying to live our boy Lu. When he tries to say he doesn't care about Evelyn's forgiveness, she decks him with a left hook to the mouth, demanding how he still has the guts to say that after everything. She asks if he thought the inner tower was some kind of child's game, and ends by saying if he messes with what's hers, he dies. I want 2 women like her in my life. He charges at her and, dodging beautifully, she lands another punch square in his face, and then follows up with a flurry of blows. Once he's on the ground, completely wrecked, they remember she's from one of the 10 great families. Then, it's announced that the tickets are going to be checked. Everyone is told to have their tickets ready. Some ghost-like figures show up asking for the tickets, or else you know what happens. Meanwhile, an intense battle is raging between the protagonist and the princess. The protag looks like Neo from The Matrix. He's impressed and admits the strength of a princess of Zahard. He says he heard she's the daughter of someone called the King of the Tower and asks if that's true. She replies that biologically no, but in terms of her current relationship with the king, yes. He wants to know what she means, and she says she's an adopted daughter of the king. She explains that the Zahard family selects the most talented girls in the tower to become Zahard princesses, and the chosen ones borrow Zahard's power to climb the tower. Makes sense. The protag says that sounds like a super complicated system. She calls him dumb for not knowing what the princesses of Zahard are. He says he's only clueless about things related to the tower. Then he asks her for a favor, if he wins. The ticket slips out from his clothes, but he quickly grabs it back. He says he wants to meet the king of the tower. The princess apologizes, saying that's the hardest thing to do in the tower. Even as a princess of Zahard, it's not that simple. He doesn't get it. Isn't that her father? She explains that the only ones able to meet the king directly are those who possess one of the 13-month series, weapons granted directly by King Zahard, 13 in total, of course. The princess who receives one of the 13-month series weapons earns the right to meet the king in person. And that's exactly why this princess is climbing the tower. She wants to obtain one of the 13-month weapons, meet the king, and send him straight to the afterlife. The protagonist breaks the 4th wall of the novel, and says this is the same lore we saw back in Season 1. She tells him to shut up because the details are different. Then, the protagonist says he'll help her get one of the 13-month weapons, and in return, she'll make him meet King Zahard. And well, if the king turns out to be a bad guy, he'll take him down. They hear sirens going off with the ticket check announcement, and she notices his ticket fell without him realizing it. But foolishly, she tells him it fell to the floor, and when he bends down to pick it up, she steals the real one from his pocket. Amazing plot twist. It's revealed that the ticket on the floor belonged to a random regular she robbed earlier while walking around the cruise. He gets pissed that he lost his real ticket, and she hides it in her boot. And since he's a virgin, he doesn't have the courage to touch the princess. She says that if he tries, she'll accuse him of harassment. He starts crying, wondering how he's supposed to steal the ticket back. She tells him that if he can't even do that, how does he expect to take down King Zahard? She's going to show him that this isn't something to joke about. The protagonist realizes her aura suddenly changed. Just as they're about to start fighting seriously, the ghost buddy shows up in the bathroom for the ticket check. The ghost asks to see their tickets, but even though they're holding them, he starts freaking out, saying the tickets don't belong to them, growing bigger and turning red. He says staying there without a valid ticket is illegal. So since there's nothing else to do, they decide to fight the ghost. Hell yeah. Back outside the cruise ship, Danjon still wants to know where the director went and starts realizing the Shinsu is acting like a living creature because it's chasing the cruise. Deep below, the director arrives near the ship and wants to know what happened while he was gone and how someone created such a massive Shinsu. We're shown that strange guy who threw a Shinsu ball at someone running. A black sphere near the guy starts talking, saying that if the one who escaped made contact with the regular, the one who devours light, would awaken. The guy tells it to stop saying creepy stuff and that wherever the dude ran to, they just have to find him and finish him off, following the scent of blood, all while looking toward the cruise. The director flies to where the ship is and asks Danjon how this happened. Danjon replies that he doesn't know, saying that suddenly a huge amount of Shinsu appeared, all the protagonist's fault for being too strong. The director says he'll handle the situation and tells Danjon to instruct everyone to return inside the ship. Then he starts throwing a bunch of purple spheres into the Shinsu, which quickly disappears. Danjon says that was incredible. But the director still wants to know how that Shinsu showed up out of nowhere, because that's supposed to be impossible. Not really, it's totally possible. Back to the crazy ghost, and the two even crazier ones. The ghost starts yelling, asking how they dared enter the cruise without tickets. The princess says she'll take care of it, and starts chanting some kind of incantation. Right after she finishes, she gathers Shinsu around her body, and attacks the ghost quickly. The protagonist gets curious about the type of power she used, but then sees that the ghost is regenerating again, so he charges in with hand-to-hand combat, but it's useless. The ghost screams, saying he's a spirit made entirely of Shinsu, and regulars, like him, who've never properly controlled Shinsu, can't even touch him. The protagonist gets pissed because, once again, it's all about Shinsu. He thinks maybe if he used his light power, it might work, but he doesn't want to do that now. So he tries once again to learn how to use Shinsu. He retraces everything Neo told him. Create an imaginary sphere, and then fill it. And outside, just as the director was about to leave, an even bigger sea of Shinsu appears again. The director gets angry, yelling at it for defying his will and throws more black spheres at it. With the ship shaking, the princess and the protagonist keep trying to fight the ghost, but it's not working, and they're getting crushed. The princess complains to the ghost, saying she accepted the supervisor's test and earned the ticket with her own abilities, shouting at the ghost to listen to her. Suddenly, she summons a beautiful new power, calling on the fairy of the fifth river, Red Ratala. The ghost wonders who she is, and how she managed to change the weather out of nowhere. The protagonist notices she got even stronger after summoning this power. She says her name is the name of the River of Madness. Yeah, she's nuts now, and then attacks the ghost, finally managing to land a cut. Even the ghost gets scared to fight her and begs her to wait, saying he understands her complaint now and realizes it was just a test ordered by the supervisor, man shaking. But he says the ticket she has isn't hers. It belongs to the protagonist, and vice versa. The only way to pass the check is to switch the tickets back. The princess replies that he should have said that 5 minutes ago and finishes him off. R.I.P. Ghost, we'll remember you for being dumb. The princess says now they're even, but tells the protagonist to hand over the ticket he has. He asks why they can't just exchange the tickets peacefully so neither of them gets eliminated from the test. But she says she told him from the start she was going to steal his ticket and get him eliminated because he was her prey. So they start brawling again, and with a slash toward the protagonist, he manages to grab her hand and realizes she's fighting him using Shinsu. He gets mad because everyone he fights knows how to use Shinsu, and he's the only one who doesn't know how to use this power. She just tells him to shut up. He figures this power must have a time limit, but if he waits for it to wear off, he'll lose the chance to swap tickets. Still, the protagonist doesn't think it's right to use his power against the princess, so he decides to stick to his usual approach and tries once more to use Shinsu. Every time he tries to use his power, a huge wave of Shinsu rises under the cruise ship. The director decides to investigate which part of the cruise the Shinsu is heading toward, and finally, the protagonist manages to create a Shinsu sphere. The protagonist is super happy to have finally created a Shinsu ball, but, as always, poor people's joy doesn't last long. Shinsu starts leaking heavily from his hand. The princess doesn't play fair and charges at him. Just as they're about to clash, the director arrives at what seems to be their location. He's furious and says that everything in this world must obey his will. This time, he gathers a massive sphere. Danjon tries to warn the director that if he launches that attack at the cruise, he'll destroy it, but the director doesn't care. In the middle of the fight between the protagonist and the princess, they see the wall breaking and notice the incoming attack. They barely manage to stop the director's blow together. The protagonist asks why the director attacked them, and the director asks if the Shinsu was heading toward the protagonist. He answers that he thinks so, and says if the director has a problem with it, he should go deal with him directly. Bold move. The director says that's impossible, because the two of them are on completely different levels. Both the protagonist and the princess don't understand what the director means, so he explains. The protagonist is just a regular, while he is a ranker and the head of the test supervisors. The director gets annoyed because his attempt to provoke the protagonist doesn't work. Apparently, he knows the protagonist is the strongest on the cruise. Suddenly, the sea of Shinsu appears again behind the director. The protagonist starts to panic, wondering how to control it, and the director realizes he has no clue how to control his own Shinsu, which is kind of obvious, honestly. The director spreads his dark power over the protagonist's Shinsu sea, and the protagonist notices it's very similar to the power of those who devour light. Gradually, the light of his Shinsu starts fading, as if it's being devoured. The director says that no matter how great the protagonist's talent is, if he can't control it, then he's nothing more than a newbie in the tower. Jealous much. The protagonist wants to figure out how the director is using a power similar to the ones that devour light. He wonders if there's a connection to Phantaminum. If that's the case, he knows he needs to stop treating this like a game. The director tells the princess there's little time left before ticket verification ends, and asks what she's going to do. She pulls the ticket from her boot and decides to give it back to the protagonist. He's genuinely surprised, and she tells him this doesn't mean they're allies. She says she'll eliminate him in the next test. He agrees and says that one way or another, he's going to make her join him, so they can meet the so-called King Zahard. After all this chaos, the protagonist returns to his room and finds Neo sitting there. Neo asks why he looks so down and even jokes, asking if he's constipated. The protagonist yells that it's nothing like that. Then he asks Neo more about using Shinsu. He says he wants to learn how to use it better than the director. Neo warns him to avoid conflict with the director as much as possible and to be careful. The protagonist asks how Neo speaks like he knows the director well. Not to raise suspicion, Neo simply says that if the protagonist wants to control Shinsu, he'll need a teacher. Besides the director, there's only one more person who's best at controlling Shinsu, the supervisor who looks like a dog. The next day, the protagonist just barges into the wave controller class. The supervisor asks what the hell the protagonist is doing there, since he's sure he isn't a wave controller. The protagonist says he's a fisherman, but he's only there because he has nothing left to learn from the ugly-haired guy, aka Dan-John. Back in the fisherman's room, Dan-John is furious when he hears the protagonist ditched his class. I like this guy already. It's also shown that the princess became a fisherman too, and she's irritated about having to learn from a loud supervisor. Meanwhile, in the Explorer division, we see our dear Evelyn refusing to touch a very cute dog. Her supervisor says it's impossible for her not to do it, since she inherited the best bloodline of the Lo Papilla family. She asks Evelyn if she's really going to waste that talent like it's nothing. Evelyn screams that she'll never do it. The supervisor forces her, saying she must because she's the daughter of the Lo Papilla family's leader. As soon as she touches the dog with Evelyn's hand, it dies instantly. F in the chat for the cute dog. Evelyn walks away sad and runs into Lou and Rohan, but ignores them and keeps walking straight ahead. Over the next few days, we see Lou finally managing to throw his spear and hit the target. Evelyn still upset about not being able to use her talent, the princess defeating everyone as usual, and our protagonist doing a pretty good job at controlling Shinsu. Even Neo is impressed by how absurd it is. But again, the protagonist loses control, and the Shinsu bubble explodes. The supervisor comments that the protagonist really has great talent for a regular, but says he still has no control at all. However, he knows how to teach him to use his power. The protagonist starts calling him Mr. Woof Woof, but I'm gonna nickname him Big Dog, because it sounds cooler. Neo is certain the protagonist is someone who's been loved by Shinsu. Pause. The night before the crown game, an announcement is made to all regulars that the crews will arrive at the next test area at 9 a.m., and everyone must be in the crew's lobby at that time. The protagonist's team and the princess's team run into each other in the hallway. She tells him to get ready, because tomorrow he's going to be eliminated from the test. He says the same to her. Inside the director's office, Dan-John says that the test is very different from what was agreed on before. The director simply made the boss of the test a queen of rats, which Dan-John says would require a team of rankers to fight against. The director asks if Dan-John has a problem with that. Not stupid, Dan-John says no, but he suspects the director is trying to kill all the regulars. At the location where the regulars' tests will take place, we are shown the habitat of the net dolphins. They're basically the ones distributing the fiber. The queen of the dolphins appears, and, man, she's easily over 20 meters tall. The crown looks like a cracker in her hands. When the protagonist gets out of the bath, he receives a message from Dan-John saying he'll send the location of their duel, and tells him to be ready to get wiped out. Our protagonist starts getting excited about the next day's test, saying it's going to be fun since it'll be his first time fighting against a ranker. Next, we're shown a bunch of beautifully drawn scenes of the queen screaming loudly, Dan-John looking at the test island. And yes, my friends, The guy who almost died from that energy sphere ends up passed out right on that same island. On the day of the crown game, the protagonist is running when he almost bumps into the same girl he helped during Danjon's test. She offers him a drink and says she's noticed he trains hard every morning. The protagonist says he's the kind of person who feels bad all day if he doesn't train in the morning. The girl snake says he's exactly her type and runs off pretending to be embarrassed. The protagonist gets even more embarrassed, and a jealous guy appears, saying he'll never forgive him, out of nowhere. While running through the cruise ship, the protagonist comes across a literal giant penguin outside, who asks who he is. The protagonist jumps in shock, saying there's a talking penguin on the ship. Having a talking dog is fine, but a penguin? Unthinkable. The penguin tries to scold the protagonist for being rude, and the protagonist keeps asking how it's possible for a talking penguin to also be a regular. The penguin says if a talking crocodile can be a regular, why couldn't he be one too? He goes back to sunbathing and tells the protagonist to leave. Just another normal day in the protagonist's life, full of strange beings inside the tower. He finds another guy who seems to be watching a manhwa. He stops and asks what he's watching, and the guy says it's an anime adaptation of a manhwa called The Supreme King is the Strongest. The protagonist thinks the name is terrible, and the anime even worse. The guy notices the protagonist didn't like the anime and starts arguing, saying he knows the protagonist thought the anime title was the most embarrassing ever, which isn't a lie, that he thought the guy was an otaku, also not a lie, and that he assumed the Pabito family watched these uncivilized manhwas. That's when the protagonist says he doesn't even know what the Pabito family is. The siren sounds, calling all regulars to the cruise lobby. When they arrive, Big Dog, the wave controller supervisor, announces that he'll be supervising the test and tells the regulars to disembark the cruise ship, since they'll be playing in the underground space below. He finally announces the type of game, the Crown Game. Neo explains to the protagonist and Rohan that this game dates back to the time of King Zahard and the 10 leaders of the great families. They used it to decide who would lead during their climb in the tower. The rule was simple: fight for the crown, and the last one standing would win. Big Dog tells everyone to follow the disembarking instructions, saying all rules will be explained at the test site. The protagonist leaves the ship, with Danjon eyeing him from the side, and saying it's cute how eager he is to fight. When the regulars arrive at the Crown Game Arena entrance, Rohan looks down and says the place seems a bit deep. Big Dog welcomes everyone to the Crown Game Arena. He says this is the 7th arena of the testing floor, and also the natural habitat of the net dolphins. Big Dog says he sent information about each creature on the island, and will now briefly explain the game. He shows a crown and a throne. This throne is at the center of the test arena. The goal is to find the crown and sit on the throne with it. A timer will start. If that team loses the crown, the timer stops and a new timer starts for the next team that takes possession of it. At the end of the test, the 5 teams with the longest accumulated time will proceed to the next test. However, the team holding the crown last will be declared the winner and will move to the next test arena, regardless of total time. In other words, even if you had 0 time until the end, but you're the last one with the crown, you win the game. Big Dog says the competition will end at 7 p.m. sharp. With everything explained, he sends everyone down to the arena, because the fun is about to begin. The supervisors debate whether the game is actually safe, since these tests are usually done in safer rooms. Even if the net dolphins aren't dangerous, if a bull appears or if the queen gets angry. One supervisor says to relax, because she believes the director thought everything through and made sure all the dangerous creatures stayed outside the arena. She says the dolphin queen won't show interest in the regulars unless they invade her territory. And that territory is far from the hall where the throne is located. The other supervisor says she's still uneasy about the director. The first says it's probably because of his bad reputation, but she doesn't think he'd be crazy enough to let anything dangerous happen to the regulars. They wonder where Dan-John disappeared to. At that exact moment, another supervisor, using the light room to locate the crown, finds out that the crown is located right in the middle of the Queen Dolphin's territory. We're doomed, FML. The supervisors are in shock and call the director insane. Back in the crown game, showing the protagonist and his team, it's announced that from now on they can eliminate each other. Quickly, their team is attacked by another nearby team. The protagonist saves Rohan, who is distracted, and says they have a lot of blood on their hands. He threatens that if the other team wants to stay alive, they should leave immediately. And obviously, those guys ran away. Neo says that from now on, everyone else except themselves are enemies. I don't trust Neo. He says they're lucky to be far from the other teams. The protagonist agrees with Neo, and Rohan heads to the boat. Meanwhile, with Evelyn and Lou's team, Lou asks Evelyn if she doesn't think it's better to look for the crown first, and she asks what they should do after. He answers that obviously they should head straight to the throne, since the more time they spend sitting on the throne, the more advantage they'll have. The guy literally said what everyone's thinking. Evelyn says Lou is thinking too short-term. Her plan is different. They will find the crown, but won't go to the throne. They'll keep running with it until the time is about to run out, then appear at the last moment and sit on the throne, a much better plan in my opinion. That way, they'll be the only winners of the game, and the other teams will be automatically eliminated. So there won't be more tests. They'll go straight to the next floor. The old man with them thinks the two are very cute celebrating their dirty plan. Best couple in the story. I already ship it. The only flaw in the plan is that they don't have any light bearer on their team. Even though they have a great plan, it's frustrating because it will take them a long time to find the crown. So the old man suggests finding another team that has a decent light bearer. Then they'll hide and wait for that light bearer to find the crown, then chase them to the location. That way they grab the crown first, run away, and follow Evelyn's plan. Makes a lot of sense. They start calling the old man a genius. Lou asks how they'll be able to follow a light bearer without being discovered. The old man says that since he and Evelyn are explorers, they use drones to scout the surroundings. So Lou just has to stay a little behind, covering their back, while Evelyn and the old man handle the rest. So they follow the plan, which seems to be working. They find a decent light bearer, and after a few minutes, it seems the light bearer realizes they're being followed by a group. He whispers something quietly to his teammates, and they split up, following two different paths. Evelyn follows the light bearer and notices it might be a trap. And yes, it really is. The light bearer talks to Evelyn and says he knew he was being followed from the start. The reason he brought her there wasn't even because the crown was there. It was because Evelyn's tomb was built at that location, calling for a 1v1. A huge monster appears behind Evelyn, preparing to attack her, very ugly and big beast. She screams for Lou and the old man to help, who are running as fast as they can towards her. The scene cuts to the protagonist's group walking, and Rohan asks if their real plan is just to walk toward the throne and wait. Neo says yes, since they don't have any light bearer to show where the crown is. So they'll just wait for a team to come with the crown and take it from them. Another dirty but sensible plan. The protagonist interrupts Neo and Rohan and asks if he can go somewhere quickly for a few minutes. Hee boy. Neo asks if it's some problem he has to solve, but the protagonist just says it's a commitment he had planned earlier. Neo asks if it will take long because they can't wait for him. It's a commitment that will only last about 10 seconds. Then we see Dan-John sitting, waiting for the protagonist to arrive at the marked location. In another place, the director is watching Dan-John on a screen, wondering why he's sitting there. Well, folks, it's with this cliffhanger that I leave you with this story. If you really liked it, I'll bring you part 2. Hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like, and see you around.